Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us here on the program where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. We hope everyone had a terrific Easter, and if you're celebrating Passover, we hope you enjoy. We have a lot to cover, so let's keep going. Okay, let's break it down right now, and joining me is forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, good morning to you, and welcome back to Law and Crime.
Good morning, Jesse.
Okay, so let's talk about the defense's case. What do you think, in your opinion, is their strongest argument so far from a forensic standpoint that Charles Merritt didn't do this?
I don't know about whether or not he did it or not, but I can tell you relative to defense's argument about this event taking place in the home, we're talking about 4 individuals that were violently assaulted, and there would be a dearth of evidence. As you stated just a moment ago, it was kind of clear, and I think that this in and of itself pokes holes in the idea that this was done, in that home, in this contained area. The place would be awash in blood. So it's, how are you going to go about putting this hammer into the hand of Merritt? That's the key here, and thus far it's been very, very difficult to do.
Well, Joseph, let me just ask you this: if he did commit these killings, or someone committed these killings in the home, is it possible to clean it up so thoroughly, to paint over it? Possibly. I mean, how, if you committed this crime of killing 4 people in the home, is there any way you could cover it up to the extent where it doesn't look like anything?
Most days people can't get away with killing 1 person in a home. Now you add a factor in there like 4 folks, and I can't see someone being able to accomplish that task. That's why this always brings me back to the fact that I think that this may have occurred elsewhere, and I'm not necessarily saying that it occurred out there in the desert. The desert was just where they finally were deposited. In crime scene investigation, we deal with something that's referred to as primary and secondary scenes. You can have multiple secondary scenes, Jesse, where you might have the event take place in one central location, and then bodies can be stored, they can be transported, and then finally deposited. Just what I've named right there are 4 different connections that we could potentially have with this. And I'm still not convinced that these bodies weren't stored for a time before they were buried.
I think we're all not convinced about a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm still not sure exactly where this happened. Okay, so let's try to understand exactly what was happening here. Joseph, when we look at the house, when we look at the condition that it was in before the family disappeared, is there anything that strikes you as odd?
I think that what is odd about the narrative that's being painted by some that these attacks took place in the home is the fact that, first off, there's no evidence of blood sample anywhere, and secondly, it looks like they were going about their normal course of life, doesn't it, Jesse? Things are left strewn about. That they just kind of bolted out of the house. We see one image here that was taken in passing by the patrol officer. Keep in mind, relative to the patrol officer, they weren't working this as a homicide at that particular time. This is a welfare check they were essentially doing, an inquiry into where these people are. And so you've got bits of information that are scattered all over the place. But what I can tell you about that home is that in most cases where you have someone that has gone in and perpetrated some horrible crime within a dwelling, there will be an over-the-top effort to try to clean the area. Look, everything was distributed as someone that was just working in the house, living in the house, and this sort of thing. Things weren't picked up. They were all left strewn about. So that leaves us to this point. Was it possible that these homicides, with such copious bloodletting, could have taken place in this home?
Are you convinced what we show, that image of what appears to be blood marks on the kitchen table, are you convinced that's blood? Because I know there's been a back and forth about what that might actually be.
Yeah, keep in mind that when we don't ever say in forensic science that something is blood simply based on an image or even our visualization. We just refer to it as a brown stain or a light red stain until further testing can be applied. So, we're left wanting at this point in time. I cannot eyeball that, and say, yes, in fact, that is blood.
Okay, and let me ask you this, the paint. The idea that the sledgehammer that was found at the gravesite, Summer's bra that was found at the gravesite that had paint on it. And we know that there was painting going on in this Fallbrook home, in the McStay's family home. What does that tell you?
Well, I'm curious. I'm really curious, and I have not seen them. I would be very curious to see the reports that were generated relative to the chemistry behind the stain on the hammer and the bra compared with the paint samples that were in the can and that were being utilized. They have a very specific chemical signature. Now, you can't say it with 100% certainty, but you can say it with relative scientific certainty that these two things match up. And so I would be very curious to see that. It is a coincidence, I think, an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, the prosecution really wants to say that this killing happened in the home. This is Charles Merritt had the opportunity to do it there. And the one thing you mentioned earlier that I really struck me as odd is killing 4 people as opposed to 1. I mean, what do you think the sequence of events would make? What makes more sense? Would somebody have killed Joseph McStay first and then killed the family, killed them all together? Because let's not forget, he was found in a different state than the other 3.
Yeah, he was. And a lot of this is going to go to the personal relationship that may have been involved with these individuals. I find it interesting that he seemed, at least, and forgive me if I'm wrong, to be partially restrained in some way.
Yes.
Summer's attack was particularly violent. That says quite a bit. Maybe she fought back. You're going to attack the individual or restrain the individual that poses the biggest threat. That's just logic being applied. So was there some kind of violence prior to, indwelling, like tete-a-tete, one-on-one violence that was going on? And if that's the case, if it took place in the house, Jesse, you're going to see broken, upturned furniture,
Sure.
broken china, all these sorts of things that we think about in a violent fight.
Yeah, look, it raises more questions than it does answers, and I wonder if that's reasonable doubt on the part of the defense. That's the prosecution talking about motive and suspicious activity. I want to focus more on the gravesite, the crime scene here. Joseph, what can we know? What should we be thinking about in terms of a gravesite out in the Mojave Desert?
Yeah, this is what we refer to as a classic clandestine grave. What are the odds, Jesse, that this motorcyclist would find these bodies? If it wasn't for this guy, these bodies, maybe they would have been found, but it was just dumb luck that he came across these bodies to begin with. Out of the way, this is an area that someone would have had to have been familiar with, Jesse. The isolation of it. And trust me, I've been to that area of the country. There is a whole lot of isolation out there, and it is rugged, unforgiving terrain. Mm-hmm. I'm still amazed that the remains were intact to the point which they were. Counsel went a bit overboard talking about that there wasn't, just a few bones. There was more than a few bones. There was a significant amount of skeletal sample to be found out there.
Right.
But it's amazing that they found anything at all. This is a very isolated area.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, if you want to get rid of a body or bodies, that's a place to do it. It's the same kind of thing about throwing bodies out into the ocean or the sea. I get it. I understand why they were put there. Just who put them there? That's the question.
Right.
It's a really sad case, when you think about the children, this whole family, you hear about the toys. I just want to go back to the gravesite, though, and I'm back here with Joseph Scott Morgan. What I want to ask you is what we talked about last time, is the idea of that they were buried in shallow graves in the desert. What does that tell you about who did this, in the sense that were they in a hurry? I mean, getting rid of these bodies in a shallow grave as opposed to there's other ways of getting rid of bodies. What does that tell you about who did this?
Well, okay, let's talk about burying in this kind of composite soil that you have here. People think of going to the desert, that it's going to be like going to the beach. If you've never been to this kind of environment, and it's not, this is sun-baked. It's very, very hard to dig down in here. You can knock off that top surface of soil, but it is heavily compressed to get in there. It takes a lot of work just to dig to this point. And they've got 2 graves to dig here, Jesse. And I'm sure, you know, that whoever's doing this is, even though it does seem like an area of light isolation, in their brain, you can think, okay, I've got to dispose of these bodies as expeditiously as possible. But people, you know, they might think that people are watching them. So this is about as deep as you can go. You actually need something beyond just a shovel to facilitate this really well. A pickaxe, for instance, would help quite a bit, and maybe some other tools to break this soil up, because it's very difficult to get a body down in it. So this is not a normal clandestine burial. In the area running up the East Coast, for instance, if you're going to dig a grave, it's actually quite a bit easier in the soil composites that we have here as opposed to out there, to dig deeper here than it is there. So I don't know that we can necessarily read into a lot about how quickly this was done.
Well, timeline is important here, and I want to get to that next. Summer would not take the boys to Mexico. Now, Joseph, we're trying to understand exactly what happened to this family, and I want to ask you, what is missing? I mean, we know there's a lot what is missing, but what is exactly tying Charles Merritt to these murders? Because there's a lot of theories, but what is tying him to this crime?
There's an overwhelming amount of speculation that has been put forth. But as far as if folks are wanting physical evidence and tiebacks, I think that that's very difficult. You know, they go into the idea about spending money, you know, after these individuals have disappeared. And I have a real hard time wanting to, say that this is evidence that he committed a homicide. He also, in opening, he said, well, Merritt refused to go into the house, when they were doing the welfare check. Well, it's really none of his business at that point. The brother is there at that point. He didn't want to go into the house. I don't think that you can he showed up. I don't know that you can necessarily draw the conclusion that he went to great lengths to kill these people simply based on that fact or these other arguments that they're trying to make. So at this point, I think that it's very, very difficult, to say that he is specifically tied to this. And listen, the defense is about to put on quite the show, and that's what we're waiting for here, moving forward.
Yeah, they're tying it to the fact that there's a lot missing, and they're also saying there's another suspect that really investigators should have looked at more thoroughly, a man named Dan Kavanaugh, who was a business associate of Joseph McStay. We're going to take a break. When we come back, let's talk more about this Mexico theory, and we're going to play the testimony of Detective Troy Dugal. We'll be right back.